Hello, and welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. In each episode, we use a place as a jumping off point for a conversation about music, anywhere from the obvious to the obscure. Welcome to another episode of Music Maps. We are 30 years on since Definitely Maybe came out. We're joined today by somebody who was really in the thick of it, Johnny Hopkins. Welcome, Johnny.
Hey, how you doing?
We're good. So Johnny was head of press and Oasis's publicist at Creation Records in the heat of the 1990s, all the way through. Simon wrote down on the script glory years. Let's face it, Oasis glory years haven't yet finished, but through some very exciting times, all the way up until about the year 2000, I think. Johnny?
Exactly that, yeah. Exactly.
Now, since then, Johnny has, following Oasis, set up his own company, Triad Publicity, and he's worked with people like Bernard Butler, Primal Scream, and Sinead O'Connor, many, many others. Before you end up at Creation, you're doing a stint with another well-known indie label, One Little Indian.
Yeah.
Which is the home of, well, you tell the listeners who's on One Little Indian.
I mean, at the time that I was there, it was the home of the Shaman and the Sugar Cubes, and it had a lot of other really interesting records. Obviously, it had its root in the whole anarcho scene, and through Flux of Pink Indians, it was very connected to Crass and people like Annie Anxiety. So it had a really interesting history. And really interesting records, groups like Soul Family Sensation, who should have been massive, groups like Airstream, groups like Finny Tribe. It was a really, I had a lot of those records, so it seemed like a really good idea to be there. But actually, just sort of whizzing back a little bit to being 18 and buying a guitar and buying a bass guitar and failing miserably with it was that when I was at uni, in those days, universities had committees of students who organised gigs, and you were given a budget, money that you could just spend on your favourite groups, really. Yeah. And I got involved in that in the first year, and suddenly realised, of course, there has to be a team of people that organises gigs. Some of it's technical, which obviously wasn't my thing, but negotiating and sorting out the publicity was something that I really enjoyed. So,
and was this at Hull, Johnny?
So, yeah, it was. And so, we did things like, we did the Colour Field, we did initially one gig with the Happy Mondays, which then became almost like a side hustle for me, because they would call me up and say, can you get us gigs in Hull? And yeah, of course, I love you. I can do that, but it's quite unusual for bands to want to come regularly to a city like Hull because it's a little bit out on a limb. But I was amenable and, loved the band. They were off kilter and brilliant in those days, sort of, talking 85, 86. But I was really initially fascinated by this keenness to come to Hull almost every month.
The monthly gig in Hull.
The House Martins would, but they lived there,
But I saw on your Instagram, you've stuck up a flyer from the Hull Adelphi Club. You see a lot of these from Eric's or the Hacienda or the Leeds F Club. And you look back 40 years on, and it's just remarkable because on Tuesday night, you've got Pop Will Eat Itself, and on the Wednesday, the Mondays and all this. And priced at what, £1.50 or something? So
it was brilliant. And, the Adelphi was a really brilliant venue, still is, going.
Have you ever been, Simon?
It's the one that's a converted house.
It's amazing, yeah. Yeah, it looks like a double-fronted.
I talked about it with Nick Banks on a Pulp episode that we recorded. So it's the second time the Hull Adelphi, because it's going to be mentioned later when we get onto Oasis. So it's come up twice already, but no, I've never been, but sounds like a brilliant place.
You really need to go. It really, I mean, 40 years on, and it's 40 years old this year. It's still a brilliant venue, and it's still doing great things for local musicians and great things for touring musicians.
One thing I did notice when looking up some of these venues that Oasis play on their first couple of tours, the one thing that really pleased me when I was researching this was a lot of these venues are still there. So the Cat House in Glasgow, where I Am the Walrus is recorded, that's still there now. So there are lots of a lot of these places are still around.
The University and the Adelphi and a couple of other venues in Hull became like my playground and my learning space. That's how I learned what you do in the music industry and realised that I could make it a career.
So did you promote the Happy Mondays show?
I promoted quite a few Happy Mondays shows around that time. And most importantly, I got to the bottom of why they wanted to come to Hull so often. And it seemed to have something to do with Hull being a port city that was
right
on the route to and from Amsterdam. Now, I think it was something to do with cheese import.
Yeah, I've heard this.
Edam.
Yeah.
That sounds likely.
But also, in doing that, I started making contacts with industry people, managers, tour managers, musicians. And, in that time, I was involved in shows with Primal Scream, My Bloody Valentine, Loop, all of these great artists. And that was really the base of it, of getting into One Little Indian and then Creation.
And how do you get into Creation then? Had you met Alan? I mean, I can't imagine, but maybe it happened that he put an advert in Music Week for a PR. No. But how did that come about?
Well, I'd been a big fan of Creation going back to probably about 84, 85.
Yeah.
And obviously had sort of brief involvements with the Valentines and the Primals and indeed the Bodines who were on Creation as well. But I'd never met Alan and I didn't know anyone at the label. But I was working at One Little Independent or One Little Indian as it was. There's various stories of how I might have come into Alan's sort of field of vision, but I don't know the truth of it. But I was certainly out and about and going to lots of gigs and stuff like that, but too shy to sort of go up to people that I admired, like Alan or Jeff Barrett or people like that. But anyway, sort of one day the phone rings at One Little Indian and it's for me, and I pick it up. And someone with a really strong Glasgow accent's on the phone. It was so strong, I thought I wasn't totally convinced. And this guy said that it was Alan McGee, and I went, no, it's not. And he said, do you want a job at Creation? I went off because I thought it was a friend of mine winding me up, because people knew that was my ideal job. So, he persisted and said that it really was Alan, and I kept telling him to fuck off. And then I suddenly went, but what if it really is him? And of course it was, and I had to sort of backpedal a little bit, McGee said, do you want to come and work for us? And I'm like, once I actually realised it was him, it's like, fuck yeah, of course, But so I had to go and do an interview, and I turned up at the Creation offices in Westgate Street, pre-gentrification Hackney.
Yeah.
Funny little street by the railway lines. It was sort of two buildings that were intertwined. And more than half the rooms were like textile sweatshops. and then the rest of it was creation. So I think the textile sweatshops and the creation sweatshop had kind of evolved organically to take on more and more rooms as they became successful. So the textile buildings were across the textile rooms were across the two buildings, and so were creation. So it was all mixed and matched kind of thing. And you'd walk in the door and go up the stairs or whatever, and there were like shreds of textiles on the carpet everywhere, as well as God knows what else, coming from the creation side of things. So I went in there, and unlike the interviews of today, where you have to prepare a kind of star diagram explaining why you meet the criteria, and give presentations, and be interviewed for an hour, and go for meet and greets with the companies great and good. I just walked in there, sat down with Alan and Dick Green, the co-founder, and I think Tim Abbott as well, and was asked what my 10 favourite bands were. 3 hours later, we were still talking, and I got the job, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't as simple as saying what my 10 favourite bands were, but I think I probably had to explain a little bit what I was doing at One Little Indian and what I'd done with gigs in Hull and stuff like that.
And what was the first job you did at Creation? What was the first campaign, or what was the first thing you had to do? Can you remember?
I was kind of given a lot of stuff that other people didn't want to do. Right. So amongst that would have been the Revola reissues label. So it was albums by people like William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, Nichelle Nichols, all who were on Star Trek.
I'm a big Star Trek fan, so I'm really glad that these people are being mentioned on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nichelle Nichols, what a great story. Political activist.
Yes.
Great actress.
It's a shame she didn't write a book.
She should have done.
She should have done, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure that I worked on all three of those. I have a feeling I didn't, but I was involved in, maybe the Leonard Nimoy one. Then there was a techno label called Infinite, which put out some really brilliant stuff from Detroit and from London and Somerset.
Did John Robb have a release through that? John adopted early Acid House, I think.
Yes, he did a record for Under the Censor Round name.
Oh, right, okay.
Wasn't it?
It's just that John was he was part of that early Creation family, wasn't he?
He very much was, and he kind of he still is, really.
Yeah.
But he did put a dance record out, but it came out on St Etienne's label Ice Rink.
Because they're also in Westgate Street, aren't they?
Yeah, which was related to. I think it probably came under the Creation umbrella for a bit.
Yeah,
it was also under the Heavenly umbrella for a bit.
Just
something
mad.
like that. Anyway, so I was given those, and I was given a group from Glasgow called Boyfriend, who were very much in that sort of teenage fan club, 18-wheeler family. And I think those were the first things that I did. And then after that, I did Ida, who was the Swedish wife of Andy Bell out of Ride.
We're going to skip forward because we want to get to the heart of what we're talking about. So on May the 31st, 1993, an infamous day, Alan McGee wanders into King Tut's Wawa hut in Glasgow, and he stumbles across this band called Oasis. Now, how did you find out, and I understand you found out quite quickly after Alan sees them, about Oasis?
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened is I think you have to remember this is pre-mobile phone era,
Yeah.
right? McGee did have a mobile phone, but he didn't take it anywhere with him.
It's been that big.
It was a proper Dom Jolly thing. And a few months later, I inherited it from Alan because Alan, it was a bit of a faff, right, to carry around. And in fact, I used to leave it in the office because why would I want to take it home?
If it was 1993, the only people who would have phoned him would have been Alan McGee and Tony Wilson, because they were the only people who had them. So. Oh, and Johnny.
Yeah, probably. But I mean, so anyway, I'm at home that particular night, 31st of May, in bed with my girlfriend. Midnight, the phone goes. I'm like, who's phoning at this time? At that point in time, I didn't know anyone in America or Australia or Japan. It's like, who would call? And I was like, but the phone kept ringing, and I thought, oh, someone's died. So pick up the phone thinking it was family. And it was that familiar Scottish voice. It was Alan again. Alan's like, Johnny, in a much better Scottish accent than I just did. I've just seen this amazing band. I go, great, Alan, that's really great. Really great. But Alan often finds really great bands that he's really passionate about.
Had he been this excited before about stuff that hadn't panned out?
Had he been?
Yeah, or could you tell this one was a bit different?
Not in the first line of the first call, no. Right. I cut him dead and said, look, I'm in bed with my girlfriend and I want to go back there, really. I said, look, let's talk about it in the morning, I put the phone down, I think, not rudely, but I said goodbye and agreed to speak the next day. And then he phoned again half an hour later. And this time he really grabbed my attention. I mean, I was kind of grabbed the first time without him actually saying very much. But, he started to say, I've seen this amazing band. They're so good. They've got attitude. They look amazing. They've got great songs, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great, Alan. And he also said he wanted me to do their press. And I go, I'll do it. Absolutely. Let's talk tomorrow, right? Put the phone down, all fine. Half an hour later, there's another call. And this happens throughout the night. And each time the story is getting more elaborate, more compelling, more funny. And I'm beyond sold by now. Alan is an amazing salesman. An amazing PR person. He actually doesn't really need people like me. He's just so good at it himself, he called me every half an hour throughout the night.
So you didn't get much sleep that night then?
No, not really. But I did get a great story, and the fact that one of the details was about how they threatened to trash the place unless they were allowed to.
Yeah, so they turned up without being on the bill, hadn't they? And sort of.
Yeah, I think there was some kind of confusion. They'd been promised it by Sister Lovers who were on the bill, and maybe it hadn't quite got through to the promoter or the venue or something. Or maybe it's just a fabricated story.
There's a lot of versions of this story, and they turn up and get told you're not playing, and then they eventually. So for the listener that doesn't know this is Oasis's 16th gig in total, and they play 4 songs: Rock and Roll Star, Bring It On Down, Up in the Sky, I Am the Walrus. They then talk to Alan McGee afterwards. How long from Alan's enthusiastic phone call until you actually hear Oasis?
Well, I think I put the last call from Alan down at about 6:30 in the morning, and he was back at Creation by 6 in the evening. So it's about 12 hours. And he called me down to the bunker, which was his office with Dick Green. And it was the end of the day. It was a busy day. And he just said, I've got this tape. Do you want to listen?
So this is the famous demo tape with the Union Jack on the cover.
Well, specifically the Union Jack going down the toilet. I think if it just had a plain Union Jack on it, I wouldn't have bothered listening.
No.
But the fact it was going down the toilet was far more interesting and indicated to me that this was an interesting group with something smart going on, you know, and maybe something to say. And so he played me Bring It On Down, which is, as you know, is quite a full-on, you know, punk record, really, and quite political, you know, unusually political for Oasis. And it matched perfectly with the Union Jack going down the toilet on the cover. So I thought, wow, this is great. I've got the stories that Alan's told and this one song and the visuals. That's a pretty good indicator, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, you need more than that. You know, as a PR person, you kind of got like a mental checklist. Great songs, obviously. Great live. Alan had already said that, but I needed to see that for myself, I guess. They have to look great. I hadn't met them yet, but Alan had already talked about the singer dressed all in white, looking like an absolute star, which of course was Liam. And you're also looking for people with personality that can talk and engage the press and come up with stories. And again, you know, I hadn't met them yet, so I didn't know, right?
But they had that in spades, yeah, of course.
Of course, they turned out to have that, and we found that out once they turned up at Creation a few days later.
Yeah, so, I mean, the incredible thing about the King Tut's gig is someone did actually video it. I think there's only about 5 or 6 people there, but there is actually some footage. So any listeners, you can look this up online and you will be able to actually see some footage of this.
It was taken by some Japanese kids,
right,
who were sort of massive, massive fans of the Glasgow bands on Creation.
Right. Isn't that incredible that someone filmed it, though? Like,
I know, remarkable, really.
Yeah, absolutely remarkable. But so they come into Creation in Hackney. So what are your impressions when you actually meet them?
Creation was quite, in the Hackney days, was quite a ramshackle place. And it was on about 4 floors with, I think, 2 rooms on each floor, 1 or 2 rooms on each floor. And a press office was on the 3rd of those 4 floors. And even before they'd entered the building, they managed to make an impression. You know, the way I remember it, we were expecting them at roughly, you know, I don't know, whatever time. And so we were kind of looking out for them. But it seemed like, in my memory, and I might have mythologized this a little bit, and, you know, I'm a PR person, I suppose I'm going to do that naturally. There was like a screech of car wheels coming to a stop outside the office, which made me look out the window, look down, and there was this old BMW and 3 guys getting out the car, you know, who looked like they were in a band. And it was Liam, Noel and Bonehead. And it was Bonehead's BMW, you know. And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. A nice 1980s BMW. You know, that takes a little bit of style and confidence, you know. And so they wandered into reception, and from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, you could hear just the excitement coming from the people in reception and their interaction with the 3 guys in the band. I mean, it was just electric, really. I think after that, they went down to the bunker to see Alan and Dick and Tim. And eventually they made it up into the press room. And I was introduced to them as their PR person. And they stood in the middle of the room, sort of backs to each other, kind of in a triangle, which was curious, but I guess there were three people in the room, and just started answering my questions. And it was somewhere between the Beatles interviews in America in '64,
when they landed at Kennedy,
yeah, all of that kind of thing, and where all of them had funny stuff to say, not not just the
not
singing.
just one person, it's all
and,
of them,
and Bonehead was just as funny as the other three, and the three together were just sparking off each other, and the camaraderie and everything was just really powerful, and it was just like, that's another tick on my list.
Mental checklist,
Yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But it was a mixture between those early Beatles interviews in America, crossed with the Sex Pistols on the Bill Grundy show. It really, really was kind of that, and of course, if you've all seen, the interviews that they did on TV, so that, they carried on in that kind of vibe. I just thought, wow. And of course, by then I'd heard all the songs on the demo tape, so I knew they had the songs and the humour and the quick-wittedness, to be a hit with the press and with general public.
How long is it until they actually sign with Creation? Because there's a little bit of difficulty actually getting the full deal done in the end.
Yeah, it was a complicated one. The deals that independent labels did with labels outside the UK were kind of a bit of a labyrinth, really. And the delay was caused because of that, really. So Alan wanted to sign them, and the rest of Creation, or most of the rest of Creation, did as well. And the band wanted to sign to Creation, but there were certain complications that needed to be resolved before it could be done. In the meantime, people got wind that Creation wanted to sign this group, so all the labels that had turned them down, majors and indies, were suddenly really interested in them again, including U2's label Mother. Mm-hmm. And all the A&R people and, various people from those labels were turning up at Oasis gigs in Manchester, trying to get an audience with them and trying to sign them, which is fair enough and understandable. I suppose it became part of my job when I went up to see them to not just be thinking about the PR side, but actually making sure that we kept them on side and that we didn't lose them to any of the many labels that were trying to sign them.
How do you do that?
I don't know, talking music, going out having fun times, talking football, being honest.
Yeah.
Not bullshitting them.
Yeah. I feel like their bullshit detectors are going to be really strong.
Yeah, massively so. And, they loved the whole Creation vibe. They loved Alan. They'd made a verbal commitment to him. And, I think it would have taken a hell of a lot of money to, or maybe not, I think it would have been impossible to have turned that bond over.
Johnny, as you know, this is a sister podcast of some events we do, the Rock and Roll Book Club. So we're particularly interested in music books. And I wanted to ask you, so I'll admit, one of my favourite music books ever is The Magpie Eyes Are Hungry for the Prize.
Yeah, great book, yeah.
I wanted to ask, there are two questions really. There are lots of Oasis books. are there any you would recommend to anybody? And specifically about My Magpie Eyes, we've just talked about, and we say we haven't got time to go into, and I don't think people want to hear all about the shenanigans of Sony, etc. But is that a fair reflection of what may have happened, what was being talked about as the band were signing to Creation?
What I would say is that, I mean, the stuff on the early years of Creation is unbelievable. I mean, it is so comprehensive.
Yeah.
You know, and in a way, the brilliance of that book is that it doesn't dwell too much on the Oasis years.
No. It's an important part. I'm so glad you've enjoyed it, because I say it's a book that was very meaningful for me. I devoured when I first got it. When it first came out, I devoured it in a day. And David Kavanagh, God rest his soul, was one of the very first guests we ever had when we started doing book bets.
Right.
And of course, you'll know, and perhaps they were your words, I don't know, but Alan, when the books came out, Alan was dismissive at first. Whatever. And then I think subsequently he came out and said, you know what, it's not a bad book. But when they re-released it last year before Faber, we did an event, although David couldn't be with us. But we had John Harris and we had Pete Astor. And it was nice to hear from Pete that, those early days when they're talking about the Felt and all of those first phalanx of bands, that seemed to have been recorded quite faithfully. So I'm pleased about that. I wanted to hear it from you, thank you.
I mean, the thing is, Cav was there. You know, he was going to the living room, I think, you know, and so he actually knew, you know, he's writing from experience, you know, for those early years. And as a fan, as a Creation obsessive, it was really brilliant to kind of see the background and join all the dots and everything.
Super.
You know, because, you know, I loved The Loft and I love Felt and love Biff Bang Pow and all of that, you know. So
the legend.
There we go. So back to Oasis. So they do eventually sign to Creation, I think to Sony outside of the UK.
Yeah.
At Soho Square. Were you at the Falcon in Camden on the night they signed?
Yeah. I mean, I think that night was actually when they signed the publishing deal with Sony, rather than anything else.
And Liam wanted to play with Whiteout.
Yeah,
but Noel wasn't interested at all.
Yeah, I think Noel's take on it was Oasis should just do Oasis gigs, which I understand. But I think, you know, everyone was a little feisty on and celebrating signing. So I think a bit of mischief was always going to happen. The thing with that is that, I mean, they signed that deal in Soho Square, where the publishing office was, right across the road from where McCartney's office still is. We then walked into Soho and, you know, including the Spanish Bar on Hanley Street and...
Bradley's. Still there?
Yeah, still there.
Still going?
Just about. And wherever Whiteout were playing, the Borderline or...
the Falcon, I think. Is it the Falcon?
Oh, yeah, we ended up at the Falcon, but yeah, okay. Yeah, we had been in the Spanish Bar.
Right.
Hence the mischief at the Falcon. But as we walked through Soho from the Sony publishing office, we went down this little short street called Knoll Street. I remember clocking that and thinking, you know, I knew that Noel had money in his pocket that day from the publishing, and just thinking, like, you know, the street is his. You know, in a year's time, it's the world, really.
Yeah.
The white label 12-inch of Columbia appears towards the end of '93.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a surprise when it got picked up by Radio 1?
In some respects, I suppose so, because it was a white label, but in other respects, not really, because it was a great song, really compelling song. And we'd given a certain amount of white labels to the radio pluggers, Anglo. So with the view to them giving them to selected DJs. But if I remember rightly, they gave them to the DJs really as a heads up, rather than giving it the full sell and you've got to play it. But they will also have known that if you give something to someone, an exclusive bit of music to someone, and not put pressure on them, they're probably going to play it anyway because they feel that they're getting an exclusive, which they were. So I think it was part of the strategy, really. And by then, even though we'd had to keep them really under wraps because of the signing situation, there were enough people in the industry that knew about the band and were excited about the band. People at Enemy and Melody Maker were well aware of the band. And I'm pretty sure I'd spoken to The Face, and I may well have spoken to people at Select, but said, look, I know you're interested, or in some cases very excited, but we're not doing anything for a while. So there were a lot of people on board, but, the Columbia situation certainly helped.
So in late 1993, the band head off to Mono Valley Studios, Wales, to start recording what becomes Definitely Maybe. Now, these first sessions didn't go according to plan. So what do you remember about this time and the producer, Dave Batchelor?
We were getting music back, and I think, for whatever reason, they just didn't have the energy and the noise of the live show. Mm-hmm. And that energy and noise was really important to them, and really important to why those songs really grabbed me on the demo tape.
When you hear those tapes back now, I listened to them a few days ago. It just doesn't sound like Oasis, does it? So, yeah.
The Batchelor versions.
Either of the ones that precede the finished version, it just doesn't quite...
The demo tapes still sound amazing.
Yeah.
We'll put some links in the notes on the podcast so people can go and refresh their memory.
It's all on the 30th anniversary reissue of Definitely Maybe. It's got everything from Mono Valley and from Sawmills, and you can go and listen to it. And there's a couple of tracks, Live Forever in particular, that just sounds so soft compared to what you're used to hearing. It really shows you how much is in the production that leads to the finished article. That I think
undoubtedly, and it's also as well about how songs come across live, and without Mark Coyle being on the sound desk in every venue around the country and the world for quite a few years, they might never have been as successful as they were, because he nailed that sound, all the layers of noise and the two guitars and the drums, and turning it up to 11 or 12 or 13. That gave the band real power in the live arena, and it just didn't show in the Dave Batchelor versions.
So then the second version is Mark Coyle, as we mentioned, and Noel Gallagher at Sawmill Studio in Cornwall. So they have a go at getting it right, and it still doesn't quite work. So it's got quite a troubled sort of history.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit like, if you take a suit, right? I don't know why I've come up with this analogy, but anyway, if you get it altered, you're more than likely going to fuck it up, right? And then you go, oh, it's not right. And then you have to take it to someone else. And then it gets messed around. So I think that Noel and Coyley had quite a tough job to kind of unscramble it. But I'll tell you something. I remember getting called to a meeting after Noel and Coyley had done their version, and it was me, Alan, Dick Green, Marcus, Noel, and Tim Abbott. I think it was just the six of us. Maybe there were one or two other people at Johnny Marr's flat in Chiswick, which he was renting out or lending to Noel at that point, because Noel had moved from Manchester and he staying in Chiswick in Johnny's flat. And we sat up all night listening to the two versions, the Bachelor versions and the Noel and Coyley versions. And Noel and Coyley did a better job, undoubtedly. And we'd listen to the Bachelor version of Live Forever, then the Noel and Coyley version of Live Forever. And on time and time and time again, track by track, we'd go through them, 3 or 4 times. It got to the point where, even though they were different, we couldn't tell the difference between the two. And at some point, probably 5 or 6 in the morning, we're like, everyone's mind was just, we couldn't decide because we'd heard them all too many times, and they blurred into each other. And it was McGee who says, to the question, which one's better, McGee's answer was neither of them. We're going to have to re-record it. And to re-record an album by a new band again is kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
You know, but McGee knew it had to be right, and Noel knew it had to be right. We all knew it had to be right.
I think the money had run out, and I think Noel paid for this final mix from the publishing advance.
Yeah,
So,
I saw that on your notes. I didn't know that.
That may not. Yeah, that's something I found while I was researching. Who knows if that actually happened or not? But
quite possibly, or McGee put in money, or maybe they both did.
But it's a lengthy process here. Was there a sense that this huge potential you might not be able to get it down?
I think that once, I suppose there was a danger of that, but I think once Alan made the decision that they should just have another go at it, and once Marcus brought in Owen Morris, it was going to work, because Owen captured that live vibe that Mark Coyle and the band had created in places like the Adelphi and the Boardwalk in Manchester and everything down the years.
So what was the reaction to hearing Owen's mix?
Oh, everyone was elated because it just had
huge relief as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He brought the noise and the energy and the layers of sound.
Was Rock and Roll Star the first track that he delivered?
I don't remember, but that would have certainly been a really good one to have been the first one, because
that great intro to Rock and Roll Star, and then you've got
ending,
that.
The ending is what I love the most, because it's kind of like the Stooges. It's just relentless.
But you've got that guitar sound from that song, and once you've nailed that, that's kind of the key to getting the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Owen made it the record that it should have been.
Now, Oasis at this time still hadn't played London, and their first gig is at the Water Rats in King's Cross in January of 1994. And Simon, in his notes, has told me that was the first time they played Supersonic.
First known performance.
Okay, so tell us about their work ethic. So again, I understand they do over 100 gigs in 1994. There's clearly a sense we've got to go out. We've got to go and play this to as many people as we can. And they're doing that, aren't they? They're working very hard.
With them, and again, this goes back to the mental checklist that you have when you're involved in a new band. You think you want to know whether they're ambitious, and you want to know the scope of their ambitions. And of course, most musicians want to be really successful. But how many of them actually have the work ethic to do the stuff that needs to be done to become successful? And it's not just about writing great songs. As everybody knows, it's about a whole bunch of other stuff that they have to do. Doing the interviews, doing the radio shows, going on TV, touring, doing meet and greets, and they had that work ethic, and that was really drilled into them by Noel.
What happened, and what was your part in this legendary trip to Amsterdam in February of that year?
Yeah, I mean, it is deservedly legendary. Even though that they were at a very early stage of their career in the UK, they got the opportunity to go and support the Verve at the Paradiso, or was it the Melkweg? Can't remember now. One of those key Amsterdam venues, supporting the Verve, and the Verve were really hot at that particular moment in time. And so it was a really good opportunity for them to play abroad with a band that were kind of adjacent to them in sound to an extent, and very much in personality and lifestyle. And it was also an opportunity to go and get some photographs done.
Yeah.
Right. Well, kind of, I've always been very cautious about the flag, right?
Yeah.
And I've ended up doing a big research project on it, like an academic one. And, as I said earlier, I was happy with the flag going down the toilet, because that expressed the country in that moment. But I was also kind of concerned with how a lot of the rising British bands of that time were being pushed as being very British. And I very much didn't want Oasis lumped in with that, because I could only see that ending badly, and I was and remain really concerned with the kind of covert nationalism going on within Britpop. I'm not saying that the bands were nationalistic. I don't think the bands were at all.
Yeah, no.
But I think that the way that they were often pushed, especially when they got into the tabloid arena, but also to an extent when they were in the music press, was quite worrying. I kind of wanted them not to be seen as distinctly British.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, they were Irish Mancunians, which is a different thing,
Yeah.
I think if you look at, Blur's British Image 1 and British Image 2, I didn't want that, either of those options, no. And, they were going to Amsterdam. It just seemed like a good idea.
So what happens when you arrive in Amsterdam? What do you find out?
Well, get to the hotel. Well, maybe it wasn't. Hotel is too grand a word. It was like the
accommodation.
The accommodation, right? And mainly the rooms were kind of dormitory room. So me and the photographer arrive, and it really wasn't a hotel. You just went in through the door of the house, and with a narrow corridor and one of those kind of 1950s telephone tables blocking your way, and that was the reception desk. Like it was like the height of a coffee table, but it was like a 1950s phone table thing. And there was no one there. And then a woman arrived, and I said, "Oh, we've come from England. We're here to meet a group of musicians called Oasis." And she went, "Ah," and a look of concern on her face. And she said, "Oh, you better go upstairs." Okay. And she said, "I'll put you through to the room now." Okay. Phone rings, Noel answers. I say, "Hey, Noel, it's Johnny. I'm downstairs." He said, "You better get up here right now." Okay. Walk upstairs, open the door, big dormitory room. There's only Noel and Coyley there. And I'm like thinking, where's everyone else gone? Thinking they've gone out to have a drink or whatever. And he said, sit down. And he regaled the story of the rest of the band getting in a fight and getting deported and, being held in the hold of the ship and deported. I'm like, right, okay. So not only have we wasted money recording and re-recording the album, we're also now going to do spending money on a photo shoot that isn't happening. But we've got a great rock and roll story that plays into the image that Oasis deliver.
So McGee is happy about this when you tell him what's happened?
I'm not sure that he was initially happy about it.
Isn't the one where someone tells him what's happened and he just says, brilliant, that's fantastic, because he likes the whole vibe of this kind of thing?
I think this certainly turned out to be one of those examples. But I mean, the thing is, I knew that there was a solid gold rock and roll story there, even though we didn't have the group shots that everyone needs. I just thought to make that story really real and make it have an impact in the press, I've got to get a picture of Noel in Amsterdam. But Noel was so pissed off.
Not in the mood for photos.
Yeah, he really wasn't. I mean, he's,
who would be?
He put his life into those songs. He'd set up everything, drilled the band into this work ethic, and, got a deal and all of that. And here was an opportunity to do some photos. And they weren't there. And also, more important than the photos, play a blinding gig. So he was really pissed off, and it took me quite a while to persuade him that if we did a photograph of him visibly in Amsterdam, we would probably end up with a lead story in the NME.
Is Noel's concern at this stage that they might be blowing their chance?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely, because you have to remember that while Liam and Griggs were young, Noel and Bonehead weren't. They were around the 25 mark.
I think Bonehead's actually about 29 when the album comes out.
I think he quite possibly was, and Noel would have been a year or two younger. So yeah,
about 27, I think.
Yeah. So he knew that he didn't have time to muck around, and he'd seen, being on the road with the Inspirals for so long, he knew how the industry worked. Yeah. Being a Stone Roses fan and seeing them fail to deliver a second album, he just knew he had to make it happen and make it happen now.
Yeah.
So he was fuming. Noel was always up for a party.
Yeah.
But the work had to be done first.
Yeah.
And that professionalism is so important. You can go out, have a good time, but do the job first. In the end, I did persuade him to have his photo taken on a bridge, one of those bridges over the canals, in front of a poster that was stuck to a lamppost with the details of the gig. Verve, Oasis. He had his arms crossed, he looked cross, and fair enough. But the photo got done, and it was the lead story in the NME news pages the next week.
So it all worked out in the end?
All worked out brilliant, and it added fuel to the fire of, kind of, it helped define their image.
Yeah.
As with the interview in Glasgow.